So now we're going to talk about a second type of compound and how we name that, and those are covalent compounds. Now, covalent compounds are also called molecules or molecular compounds. So if I ask you if something is a molecule, you know, all right, I'm looking for a covalent compound. Now, covalent compounds are always made of a nonmetal and another nonmetal. Okay, so an ionic, it was a metal and a nonmetal. In covalent, it's a nonmetal and a nonmetal. And so since these are different, the way that we name these is going to be quite different as well. So we're going to first start with how you go from the formula to the name. Then we'll talk about how you go from the name to the formula. Okay, going from the formula to the name is actually quite simple. All you need to do is know these prefixes for naming them. So say, for example, I have N2, O2. So when I go to name this, I have N2O2. I know I have nitrogen and oxygen. I have two nitrogens as indicated by the subscript, so I call it dinitrogen. And then for oxygen, I have two oxygens. Instead of saying dioxygen, I say dioxide. So all we need to do for naming these molecules is add a prefix and add an ID ending to the second one. So the generic way this works out is you write prefix, nonmetal, then you write the other prefix, the second nonmetal, and you add an IDE. Okay, that's the generic formula for that. So let's look at another example we might have. Say, for example, we have S3H5. And I go to name this, I see that I have 3 sulfurs, which tells me that the prefix I need to use is tri, and I have 5 H's, which tells me that the prefix I need to use is penta, so I say tri-sulfur, penta, and instead of hydrogen, I add that IDE ending, which is pentahydride. Okay? Trisulfur, pentahydride, I add the prefixes, I add the IDE. There's only one real exception of when we omit this first prefix. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. The only real exception with naming these is you omit the first prefix if it would be mono. Okay, so let me show you an example of this. Let's say, for example, the classic example of this is carbon. I have C and O, so I have 1 carbon, I have 1 oxygen. You might think that I would name this as monocarbon monoxide, but instead what I just call it is I leave off that initial prefix, since there's only 1 of them, and I call it carbon monoxide. So the only time I leave off this first prefix is if there's only 1 of it. Okay, now notice I do use the mono for the second prefix that appears, but for the first prefix, I'm going to go ahead and leave that off. Okay, so that's a pretty simple way with our one exception of how you go from a chemical formula to a name. Let's now talk about how you go from name to chemical formula. Okay, this is actually probably the easiest thing you'll do in this unit. So say, for example, you have going the opposite way here. Let's say that you have tri-nitrogen hexaoxide. Okay, all I need to do in this case is use the prefixes to help me figure out what my subscript should be. Okay, so the prefixes are going to tell me exactly what my subscript should be. So I have trinitrogen. How many nitrogens do I have? Tri means 3. I have 3 nitrogens. Hexaoxide. Okay, hexa means 6. That means I have 6 oxygens. I'm done. Very straightforward. You simply use the prefix to get you to the subscript. Okay? Now let's say, for example, I have carbon tetrafluoride. Okay? Now, from the previous examples of going from formula to name, we know that if this prefix at the very beginning is omitted, we know that that really means that there's only one of them. Okay, we know that that means one. So I'm going to put C for carbon. There's only one. Tetrafluoride, tetra means that there are 4. So I put fluorine symbol and I put a subscript of 4. Now you know how to name, go from the chemical formula to the name of covalent, and then also go from the name to a chemical formula.